Insha'Allah ta'ala, today we're going to be continuing with this section on the benefits of al-uzla, on spiritual isolation, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. We covered the first 4 points last week, but just in revision, what Ibn Qudama talked about was how uzla is something, after talking about Allahumma salli Muhammad, suhbah and companionship, that there is also spiritual isolation that is important for us to do, and is going to be dependent on the person and where they are in their life and their hal, their spiritual state, and what is needed for them in this time. So at some times we're going to need to be with people, and that's going to be beneficial for our spiritual and our social well-being. And at other times it's going to be beneficial and important that we have sort of spiritual isolation where we're by ourselves and away from people, just between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He mentions that there are benefits to this. Last week we covered the first of them, is that we can be alone for ibadah, so that we can not have any distractions from our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so that we can feel the necessity and the sweetness of calling upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that requires, he mentions, isolation and being alone. The second thing he mentions that Muhammad, the second thing he mentions is that we will be away from sins, and the sins that come by proximity to other people. The first of them is ghiba, slandering. The second is commanding what's good and forbidding what's evil. The third is showing off, riyat. And the fourth of them is that we won't be affected by other people's disposition, because as we know that when we're close to other people and through that proximity, their disposition rubs off on our disposition. For today, inshaAllah, we're going to continue on with the third major point that Ibn Qudama mentions. فَقَالَ الْمُصَنِّفْ رَحِمَهُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى وَنَفَعَ اللَّهِ بِعُلُومِ فِي الدَّارَيْنِ. The third benefit from being in uzla, in spiritual isolation, is that we stay away from the fitan that come from fitna and from arguing. By being in spiritual isolation, we stay away from fitna and by arguing. It's very hard to argue with yourself, and it's very hard to engage in fitna if you are focusing on you and your Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this only reminds us of what we mentioned last week, that when he's saying we're in uzla, in spiritual isolation, that means also from these things, from our devices, because some of the greatest fitan happen on these things. In our pocket, we think we're alone in our house, we're not engaging with anyone, but now we're engaging in like online judo, wrestling with other people, trying to be the strongest and wisest. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. But Ibn Qudama, he continues on to say that the way that we protect by being in isolation is how we protect our deen, and by going deep into any of these other matters and the fitna that comes from them. He mentioned the hadith where the Prophet Muhammad spoke about fitna and he advised against it. He said, if you find people that are not upholding their promises and they are falling short in their trusts and their oaths, and they are like that, and he mentioned they are like they put their hands together, they're always intertwined. And so the person, he said, what do you command us to do? He said, ilzam baytak. He said, stay at home, be consistently at home, and imlak alayka lisanak, and control your tongue, take hold of your tongue, and then be with those that you know, and stay away from the things that you don't know. We could also understand that by be virtuous and stay away from vices. And what you need to do is be close to those people that are close to you, and command them with what's good and forbid what's evil, and leave off commanding or advising the general people. So in times of fitna, those that are closest to you, those are the ones that we need to advise. Those are the ones that we should be around. Those are the people whom we need to invest our time in. And wallahu a'lam, we could definitely argue that we live in a time of fitna, where left and right, it's easy to fall into different things. And I'm not saying we need to be extreme and like become hermits or whatever, or as we spoke about last week. But what we need to do is make sure that we are controlling ourselves and prioritizing those that are closest to us. We need to make sure we're prioritizing those that we have the highest level of responsibility to. For Ibn Qudama said there are many, many different narrations that come like this. The fourth benefit that he mentions is that by us being in uzla, in spiritual isolation, we then stay away from the evil of other people. and the evil that by being around them leads us to then encouraging in ghiba and in namima, and then having evil thoughts or negative thoughts about people, and claiming that people are certain things, and all of these different vices and negative attributes. By us staying alone and away from people, we can then protect ourselves from them. And I think it's important, we may have touched on it before or last week, that we pay attention to who our friends are and who are the people that we keep ourselves close to. Because it's very easily that in times of fitna or in community work in general, we can see people who we think are righteous or we think are good, but by being around them, some of their disposition rubs off on us. Or perhaps by being in proximity with them, we become, I'm trying to think of a nicer word, but essentially we become cowards, and we don't want to do amr ma'ruf wa nahy an munkar. We don't advise people what's good and stand up for what is true. And that work is oftentimes very difficult, which then can lead to breaking off relationships, which can lead to then us feeling certain kind of ways. And so because we have relationships with people and we're in community together, it's like, I don't want to say anything, or because if I say this and they'll say that. What our job to do is always to be committed to doing what's right. That doesn't mean that we don't advise and we don't be in community together in a nice way. That doesn't mean that we don't have adab in how we interact and engage with people. But that means that we have to make sure that our priorities are aligned all the time. Umar Khattab radiallahu anhu, he says that being in uzla, being in spiritual isolation, is a way that we can take a breath, we can take leave from mixing with people. So again, it's not, this is all the time that we have to do. But what Umar Khattab radiallahu anhu is talking about is that sometimes we have this and sometimes we have that. That we intentionally stay away from interacting and mixing with people so that we can be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Someone asked someone else, that it's mentioned sort of without the name. He said, can I be a companion? Can I be with you to make Hajj? Can we go together on Hajj? And he responded to him, his brother, he says, leave me to be alone and to live in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sitr, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala covering of my sins and my deficiencies. He says, because I worry that you'll see some things from me and I will see things from you that now will make me change how we think of each other. He says, don't even, leave me alone. Let me just do my thing. When I was reading that this morning, subhanAllah, I was thinking to all my mashayikh when we've traveled, and I'm like, can I stay in your room? They're like, no, leave me alone. And I also thought of a retreat we went to recently. You can't really hide from people in retreats. And so there was an after Fajr reading of Surah Yasin and Adhkar al-Sabah and all these different things. And the first day I overslept, and the last day I overslept. I was like, dang, they get to see that I'm horrible. Allah musta'an. By being in close proximity with people, then we can start to see who each other are, and then it may change how we think of each other. May Allah protect us all. So Ibn Qudamah, he said, these are some of the benefits of uzla. And what is most important, or of these that is most important, is that we stay and protect our deen, and we protect our honor, and we protect our private things that are hidden that we don't want others to see. He mentions the fifth point of benefits is that by being in uzla, by being in spiritual isolation, we aren't impacted, or that we aren't affected by other people's greed for us, the things that we have, but also our greed for the things that they have. That by being in spiritual isolation, we're able to not have hasad, and we're able to make sure that we're not wanting what we don't have, and other than that. He says, as far as their greed for us, or their wanting what we have, he says, or wanting their approval. He says, فَإِنَّ رِضَاهُمْ غَايَةٌ لَا تُدْرَكْ. He says, seeking their approval is something that you'll never achieve. a goal, something that you will never abound, that has something that has no boundaries. And so when we can be content with our own disposition and then cut off what they want and what we're thinking of them, then that then prevents us from what they wish and protects ourselves. And he says, it was said that try and translate this on the fly. I'm not even gonna try. As far as us blocking off or us stopping our seeking of approval or doing for them, he says that, or our affect or our greed is because looking or seeing the zahra, the beauty of this dunya, will then affect our own situation and will then change the things that we aspire towards. And then it will then make us seek to strengthen or to have more desire in our greed. It feeds itself, it's cyclical. And we don't know how much or how deep we can go into greed and seeking of worldly things. He said, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he says, look to those that are less than you, and do not look to those that are above you in worldly things. He says, because one of the best things that we can do, or because that is something that makes us despise the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we have. So again, we have to make sure that we're paying attention to, and this is a problem for us, particularly nowadays, when everyone, mashallah, is showing off their worldly things online. Or we can see it just by, we live in, mashallah, I mention this all the time, in Northern Virginia, in some of the wealthiest counties in America, and it just seems like the expectations that everyone, mashallah, is rich, comparatively speaking, to the larger general population. And if we're not careful of what we're looking at and what we're paying attention to and what is catching our eyes and therefore catching our hearts, it's very easy that then affects what our expectations are, what we want of this dunya, and what we think is the norm. Because then if that happens, then we can easily become ungrateful for the endless or bounteous ni'am that we have. He mentions the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَمُدَّنَّ عَيْنَكَ إِلَى مَا مَتَّعْنَا بِهِ أَزْوَاجًا مِّنْهُمْ زَهْرَةَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. And don't allow your eyes to gaze upon the blessings we've given them from this beautiful dunya, or from the zahra of the beauty, the gems, the flowers of this dunya. For we have to make sure that we're doing that whether we're in uzla or not, whether we're trying to intentionally be away from things, we're trying to be in spiritual isolation, or we're engaging in communal life. Because it's only natural that other people have different things than we have. No two people are the same. And the reality is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from His lutf, from His rahmah, from His generosity, and from His mercy, is that He covers up our deficiencies. So you may see something in someone that you wish that you had, but the reality is that's a fitna for them. I remember when I was younger, one of my good friends, we lived in the same apartment building. We would always say to each other, or he would tell me, that bro, if you had my dad, your life would be so simple. You would have no problems. And I'd be like, bro, if you had my mom, your life would be hell. But thinking about that, he was looking at me and the reality of my disposition and how his dad was. And then he was like, if our situations just were flipped, you'd be straight. You would never have anything. Not knowing that his dad's disposition was a rahmah for him, that he would never be able to handle the, mashallah, what's the word that I'm looking for? Strong parenting, we'll say, of my mother. The love, or the heaviness of her love. May Allah bless her. And the opposite would also apply. That if I had a very easy dad like his, then who knows where I would have gone. I needed that discipline. So it's very easy for us to look at these things. Also, particularly on social media, everyone is pontificating. Everyone is faking like there's something they're not. And I've said this many times before. I have counseled some of the celebrity couples. And they would, right after cussing each other out in a conference call, will get on and post a picture together online. Wallah al-azim. And I will text them and say, really? You guys were like threatening each other with the divorce and cursing each other out, but now you're online posing together with these different, like, why? Allah musta'an. It's easy for us to see that. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. and become deluded by the blessing, not only thinking that that is the goal, and thinking that our situation is no good. The last benefit that he mentions is that by interacting and being around people, we then now have to deal with people who, I'm trying to like translate it in the most PC way. We have to deal with the weightiness, the heaviness of people, and the people that aren't as astute as we may be. We have to deal with people who just don't see the world the way they do. They're a little slow to understand things, as we'll say. And then we have to then deal with their poor manners and their disposition. And then we become hard by their lack of astuteness, by their lack of attention, by their slowness. They're not recognizing what's going on. And then it starts to affect us. And this is important as well, because sometimes we get in religious communities and we get around people and we start to understand things. Allah blesses us with some basira. We start to see the deen a little bit differently. We start to become conservative in practicing, mashallah, hijab and thobe and all of these different things. And then when we get around people who don't have the same worldview, who don't appreciate things the way that we do, we then start to look down upon them. Or we're then harmed by, or our journey then becomes tripped up because of other people. As we start off this section, that uzla is not to be a situation where we look down upon others, nor that we think that we're better. And so, wallahu a'lam, what Ibn Qudama is talking about is that we become protected by witnessing their deficiencies. We become protected by witnessing their lack of understanding. And this is something, again, as all of these points, we have to do whether we're intentionally staying away from people, but even more so when we're dealing with people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may have gifted us something that objectively is good. And that is easy for us to do. It's easy for us to dress a certain way, or to carry ourselves a certain way, or be in certain places, or stay away from certain places. But also sometimes we take things that are subjective, that are not objectively true. Of course, we need to pray to stay away from alcohol, but then how it is that we carry ourselves, the places that we go or don't go, we don't know other people's intentions. We don't know other people's dispositions. And then now we start to look down upon them, or we start to judge them, or God forbid, we think we're better. So we have to be very, very careful when we're interacting with people and what we think about them. Like, mashallah, I have some brothers, I love these guys. They come to all my classes, but every time they come, they're on their phones. Every time. Good guys. Can I be mad at them when they come? They sit in the back on their phone every single time. And alhamdulillah, they came to the masjid. Alhamdulillah, they're engaged in good stuff. And they're very, very active in the WhatsApp groups. May Allah guide them. Who am I to judge? Who am I to look down upon them? Alhamdulillah, they're here. I'd much rather them be in the masjid on their phone than at Shahid. May Allah protect us. But wallahu alam, we need to be very, very careful and think about both suhbah and uzla, both being in companionship and mixing with people, and also being alone. Because the next section that Ibn Qudama mentions many different things about, which we'll probably summarize and not mention extensively, are the afats, the harms of being in isolation. That we then are able to, that the benefits of mixing with people, he mentions that we start to learn. We benefit from other people by learning. We can benefit, we learn, but also we can benefit people and they can benefit from us. We can learn to have adab. We can learn their adab and start to have adab. We can feel appreciation, affection, and love when we're with other people. We can learn humility in interacting with other people. We'll summarize them inshallah next week, and we'll read the section, closing out the section of Uzla next week. But I think it's very, very important that to understand it's not one thing. It's not one size fits all. In different parts of our life, we will need different things, and in different parts of our life, we'll have to do both. The goal here is that we're balanced, that we recognize there are certain times that we need to do certain things and certain times we don't. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us people that really benefit from them. Actually, I'm going to read a little bit because alhamdulillah, we finished this sort of quickly. He says that from the harms of uzla is that, and in the section of the harms of being in isolation, is that we can miss out on some of the greater intentions or the greater purposes of the deen and the dunya. And that is that we benefit with and from others. And we can't do that unless we're interacting with others. So some of the things that we get when we're interacting with others is learning and education. The only way that we're going to be able to learn is some sort of interacting. But again, you'll recognize with all of these things, it requires a very thoughtful intention. Why are you going to these gatherings? What are you trying to accomplish in these situations? And we have to make sure that whether it's the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like the brothers are doing, and the sisters I think are doing in the Quran intensive, whatever it may be, that our niyyah is purely to earn Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure. Another thing that we can do is we can benefit people, we can serve. It's very difficult for us to serve, and it's very difficult for us to benefit others if we're in our homes by ourselves. How do you take care of your brother or your sister? How do you take care of their needs? How do you even know their needs to do that? But also we can benefit from other people's service. It's a two-way street. Now, by being together with people, we then can compete in our trying to earn Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure. It reminds me of the hadith of Abu Bakr and Umar, where they both competed to donate all of their wealth, or as much of their wealth as they could. If they were in uzla alone in their little cave somewhere worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they wouldn't have been able to do that. They wouldn't have been able to compete in donation and giving what they could. So this only happens when we're with people and we're trying to benefit with them and take care of their needs and take care of our needs. As far as benefiting from people that are benefiting people, whether that be with our financial means, giving sadaqah, whether it means physically taking care of what they have to do, or other than that, with upholding the things they need within the regard or the boundaries of Sharia. My teachers say that our entire religion can be summarized into adab alone. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, indeed I was sent to complete noble character. From noble character, taba'an, of course, is obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But also from noble character is interacting with other people. And if we're to sort of delineate what is adab, it's love and service. It's being good and loving people because of the khalq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation, because of from the ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But also is serving them, taking care of their needs, trying to be diligent. And both of those are interconnected. One is not good without the other. Our service without love then becomes arrogance. Our service without love becomes difficult, and we do it begrudgingly. And love without service can become narcissism and sort of expecting a one-sided relationship. But we need both of those things. The third thing that he mentions is that we can learn adab and we can practice adab. If the metaphor that my teachers talk about with regard to being in amongst other people, particularly when you go to benefit or sit with a teacher, they said the teacher is like a doctor and the masjid or the place is like a hospital. Everyone in the masjid with you are sick. So when you go to benefit, when you go, I've got a wound, I've got a sickness, I want to benefit from the teacher, don't pay attention to the other sick people. And that's really, really important, because we can go to religious spaces or spaces in general to benefit, but then we get turned off by other people in the gathering. They're poor adab, and then that makes us have poor adab. Astaghfirullah, look at this brother over here. Look at that sister over there. Don't they know better? Look at that person here. Not knowing this person has a problem. This person has a need that we don't have. They're sick different than us. Allah musta'an. Having interacting with people forces us to have adab. It forces us to practice all the things that we claim that we do and we know. And it also forces us to break our own nufus. It forces us to break down our egos and the things that we want. I'll never forget one time I went to a retreat. And I left Boston as the Imam. I went to the retreat as nobody. I may have told you the story before. I got to the retreat and I woke up the next morning mad at everybody. I went to pray Fajr. I had my kids with me and I was just mean mugging everybody. And I didn't know why. And I caught myself like, why are you so angry? It's Fajr. You just woke up. And I realized no one knew who I was. And I'm used to everyone knowing who I am. So my nafs was getting destroyed. And because of that, I was responding with arrogance. So by being with people in a different environment, forced me to look in the mirror and say, you're an arrogant jerk, break your nafs. And wallahi, it was very difficult. It also forces us to control our desires. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us. Another thing that he mentions, that by being with people that we can then feel the connection and the love and the affection that you can only have by being around people. And how when we're with our brothers and our sisters, it's from our deen to give salams, to be kind, to give gifts, to ask about who they are and how they're doing, etc. So it's really important that then we can interact with people with sincere intentions. The fifth thing that he mentions is that we can acquire reward, whether it's from attending janaiz or visiting the sick, or it's taking care of their needs, or responding to their calls, their invitations. These are different reward that we can get just by being with people. Also, it's an opportunity to open doors and to have for other people. So perhaps by us interacting with someone, it allows us to be, I can't think of anything but a sports metaphor, to get an assist. Like we help someone else do something else is good. Allah understand. The last thing, or no, it's not the last thing, it is the last thing, is that it forces us to be humble. Being with other people forces us to practice humility, to recognize that we are not the best person and that other people have things that are more important than us and other things that whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed them with. Because it's possible, Ibn Qudama mentions that arrogance is one of the reasons why we choose to go into isolation. It's very possible that, as we mentioned earlier on, that I can think I am so good, so now let me stay away from people because I don't want to be impacted by these poor people. And that then going into spiritual isolation by avoiding people now is a problem because it's only because of my own arrogance. And it disenables us from being generous and from serving others. Allah musta'an. And the sign for this, how we know that we are arrogant, is that the sign that we have this is that we love Yes, Jazakallah khair. Is that we like to be visited and we don't like to visit other people. We like to visit and we don't like to visit other people. And that's like really important. We want to be the center of attention. I'm now the one, subhanAllah, I've seen this in marriage counseling as well, where like the husband or the wife, we don't have to specify, loves hosting, loves initiating hosts, and be known as the one who hosts. Because then they're the one who's done all the good. But then how do we feel? When we're visiting others, or they're visiting us. For Allah al-Musta'an, we have to make sure that we are, I think what is important is we recognize where we are and what's required for us in the proper time. He says, as far as the adab of uzla, the etiquettes of being in isolation, that we have, the first things we have an intention. And we intend that by being in isolation, we're protecting other people from our own evil, on our own negative traits. And that we hope that we are then also protected from harming other people or their harm. That's the first thing. But also, we spend that time in knowledge and in action, in dhikr and fikr, in remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and reflecting on His attributes. And trying to get, hoping that we get the reward of that. But also, from the adab of being in spiritual isolation, if we're choosing to do so, is that we're patient. Also, from the things that may happen, whether it be in isolation or from other people. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be wise in our interactions or the lack thereof. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us people that always engage sincerely for Allah's sake. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us people that give us good companionship, but also give us the confidence to be alone when we need to be alone. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from the evil of people, our own and others. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make our intention sincerely for His pleasure. Allahumma ameen. Anything I said was correct from myself, from instance of correct was from Allah and Allah alone. Anything that I said was incorrect from myself and shaitan. We open it up for questions, inshallah.